South Africa has yet again received an international cash injection, this time in the form of a reported $497 million loan from the World Bank. And this allegedly for the purpose of financing a clean energy project. Now, the project is reported to have the aim of decommissioning and repurposing the Komati coal-fired power plant using renewables and batteries. And this is in line with the government's efforts to transition the country towards a low-carbon development path with reliable, affordable and sustainable energy. So for more on this, we're joined by Duma Gqubule, who's an independent economist and commentator on issues of economic development and transformation. Duma, always good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thanks for the invite, Sakina.
So yet another loan from a Bretton Woods institution, and immediately the questions that come to mind, at least for me, is do we need it, one? And two, can we actually afford it?
Sakina, I saw a statement this morning. Someone sent it to me. The World Bank is saying they approve of our investment plan that will be presented at COP27 in Egypt this week. Now, I'm thinking the World Bank has had sight of this investment plan. South Africans, I'm informed South Africans, I haven't seen this investment plan. I wonder why that is the situation. So the government must level up with all of us and provide all the information they need to analyze this investment plan. So now, in terms of debt, let me just start at the top. Our national debt is about 4.7 trillion rands. It's about 70% of GDP. It is not high by international standards. That is why people like myself argue that we need a fiscal stimulus to grow our economy. However, the unique privilege we have as a country is that a very low level of our total debt is foreign currency. It's denominated in foreign currency in dollars. So that's about 10% of our total debt is denominated in foreign currency. Third, the budget last week said we don't want to increase debt, we want to reduce debt. And I find it very strange that now all these loans that the government is signing, for example, the 8.5 billion climate loan, the same people who say that we can't borrow, it's okay to borrow from international agencies, but we can't borrow in South Africa. Now, I just want to say that now, the unique privilege we have is that we have low foreign currency loans. Every single emerging market currency crisis since Mexico in 1982 to Sri Lanka in 2022 and Zambia recently has been caused by an accumulation of foreign currency loans. It's called the original sin in development finance. Now, we as South Africans, we should be protecting our sovereignty and not accumulating these foreign currency loans. That's my position. And then when it comes to Eskom, Eskom has got a debt of 400 billion, and the government is going to lift up to 2/3 of that debt to the national balance sheet. And they're now taking another loan of 9 billion rands to be able to fund this. So what we need a plan for Eskom to finance the increase in capacity that's required over the next decade and more. Yeah.
So help me understand this, Duma. So when it comes to Eskom, so as we said, government indicating they'll take up between 1 and 2/3 of that Eskom loan to the national balance sheet. But then there's this 8.5 billion rand, and do we know how that's going to be spent exactly, and how much of that will be going to Eskom?
So that's the details that I was talking about at the beginning that we don't know. Like, the government hasn't told us this 8.5 billion rands, $8.5 billion, 160 billion rands. What will it be used for? So everybody else knows what this investment plan is. We South Africans do not know what this investment plan is. We don't know how much of it is grants, how much it is loans, how much of it is commercial loans or concessionary loans. So we need to know the details of this this climate finance deal. And will it compromise our sovereignty? Are there fine print in this deal that says you must privatize Eskom, we're a sovereign nation. We can't have foreigners dictate to us the pace of our transition. This is something that we as ordinary South Africans, through democratic processes, must decide on the pace of our transition, and not foreign financiers here.
And that's an important, question to understand, Duma, because if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, a few years ago, you had a situation in Zambia where the power utility there had also run into some serious problems financially, and there was almost a takeover by stealth in that regard, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's true. So, the government, like a normal government, Sakina, they budget for, they increase capacity every year. And there's a line item in every budget that, without much debate, that we're going to increase our capacity of energy every year, like 5 gigabytes, and then how it's going to be financed. So that is what we should be doing in South Africa. Since 2018, when the new administration, there's been no addition to the capacity of Eskom, despite all the talk about private sector investment. I haven't seen it if you look at the annual financial statements of Eskom as to new capacity that has come on. So I just think that it is absurd. We need a financing plan for Eskom, a financing plan for this transition that we must all see and interrogate through democratic processes.
So just again, with regard to Eskom, and as you say, we don't seem to be too clear on the detail. So if, for instance, government does take up to 2/3 of that Eskom debt and takes it to the national balance sheet, and Eskom then gets another part of that $8.5 billion loan, how does that then actually help Eskom in terms of its balance sheet?
Okay, now we've got to look at the government's plan to add new capacity. 100% of it must be given by the private sector, none of it by Eskom. So now that is wrong, because we can't our energy security, 100% of it from the private sector, and the endless blackmail that we have from the private sector. The reason these projects are not going ahead is that the private sector is trying to blackmail us, tell us to reduce localization, reduce BEE requirements. But if the government takes control of energy security, they will, after the Eskom has this debt lifted off the balance sheet, there will still be need for financial support to Eskom. For example, we need to have free basic energy because South Africans can't afford these energy bills. So we have to budget for that. Number two, we have to budget for new capacity that the state will bring. So my view is that we must have Eskom 2 and Eskom 1. So Eskom 1 is the legacy assets, and then Eskom 2 is the new capacity. And we must fund it from our national balance sheet and not depend on foreigners to be able to fund our transition.
So if we look at this project that is now envisaged at Komati, is this to serve as a reference on how to transition fossil fuel assets for future projects in South Africa, Duma? And if so, it seems to be a very expensive experiment.
I was listening to the presentation in Parliament by the board, the board chairman and the executives, and it is like one of the MPs correctly said, these renewables, they don't create much jobs beyond the construction phase. And so what was said, we need to take control of this thing and not have the World Bank and the international people dictate to us. We have to have our own industrial policy, because this 500 billion rands, there will be interest payments that leave the country, number one. Number two, we'll be creating jobs in China, because China, the renewables, China owns about 90% of the value chain, the value chain in terms of renewables. And so we'll be exporting, there'll be interest payments that go out of the country, and jobs. We'll have to import all the stuff that we need for these renewables in from China. So we need to have a proper industrial policy. And that is why I say we have to take control of our energy security and not depend on foreigners to fund it. Yeah.
So if I can, capture correctly what you gave us in terms of numbers at the start, more than 4 trillion and 70% debt to GDP ratio is what we're looking at as our South African balance sheet here. And how many loans, Duma, has South Africa received since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic from these Bretton Woods institutions? Do we know?
Yes, I do. I was doing this for you, Sakina. So it's 77 billion from the IMF, New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, it's about 54 billion. From the World Bank, it's 13 billion. From the African Development Bank, it's about 5 billion. So that's 150 billion rands of foreign currency loans. And then on top of that, we have another 160 billion rands, this climate finance deal, and also the 500 billion from Eskom, because Eskom is the national balance sheet. It's the same thing here.
So how much are we paying back in interest, for example, on those loans?
Well, what the government says is that the interest rates are relatively low on the loans that we already took. You remember that the 8.5 billion rands, the climate finance one, we don't know the details, but the ones that they've already signed, what you must remember is that when you sign foreign loans, it might look like it's almost like a mashonisa. It looks appealing. The cost is low, but there's the risk of currency depreciation. So the previous loan was taken when the currency was at 7, the Medupi loan. Now the currency is at 18. So it exposes us to the movements of the rand on foreign currency markets. And I just think that it's an unreasonable risk that the country should not be taking here.
And are we good payers here? Are we managing to pay our international debt well on time?
Well, currently, as I said, Sakina, at the beginning, like South Africa, South Africans must understand we don't have a foreign debt. We don't have a debt problem. Our foreign debt is low. But what I have a problem with is that we shouldn't be going to these foreign institutions. We've got the South African Reserve Bank. We've got the Public Investment Corporation. We should be borrowing from within the family to finance our energy capacity. And there's endless options in terms of financing our energy capacity. I don't think we should be borrowing from the World Bank or the IMF and all these institutions, because there's the fine print and the conditions that tie us towards a transition that perhaps is not good for our country. They dictate the terms of the transition. And number two, we have to commit, we don't know, towards privatization of Eskom, which will result in high electricity bills. So we have to know through democratic processes, what have we committed to? Yeah.
And that is the question here, the hidden cost of some of these loans, because what have we actually agreed to with some of these financiers?
Yes, exactly. So we don't know. I think this thing must be released publicly this week. I think there was a press conference at the Development Bank last week. So maybe they released it then, but I don't know. But I haven't seen this this investment plan. I think it should be debated in Parliament. It should be debated by all South Africans. What are we committing to? Yeah.
And Duma, as you said, we seem to be able to go out and borrow to finance these projects, although you feel that some of it we can actually finance locally. But what do you believe at the moment South Africa should be prioritizing in terms of, if we must go out and get a loan from somewhere right now as a country, what should we be prioritizing apart from the energy transition? Where should our focus be?
Okay, so Sakina, we have to have a fiscal stimulus to stimulate this economy and create jobs. So number one, obviously, is energy. So I estimate it to be about 2%, more than 100 billion rands a year that we have to invest into our economy. So when the government invests in its people and its infrastructure, the economy grows. That's what happened during 2004 to 2008. So that's number one. Number two, we have to invest in transport infrastructure, water infrastructure. We have to do, our roads are falling apart. So we need to have an investment plan for our country and not for foreigners. What are we going to do? We need housing. We need public transport. What are we going to do as a country to meet the unmet needs of the majority of our people who are poor?
But the problem here, Duma, is that we have departments, we have municipalities that actually do budget for this maintenance. And we've seen money really wasted on some of these infrastructure projects because they either are not well done, not well managed, and the money is wasted, or you have your capex budgets that go unspent.
Well, we have to innovate in terms of institutions. We have to create payroll structures, temporary payroll structures, to spend this infrastructure money. We've got, so I think we just have to innovate. There's something like the Solidarity Fund. It was set up as a COVID response. Why don't we expand the Solidarity Fund? It is professionally managed it's professionally managed, and as far as we know, there hasn't been corruption in that fund. So let's use what we have and other institutions that have the capacity to spend the money. But we need to invest in our country, our people, and in our infrastructure to grow the economy.
Well, Duma, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. Duma Gqubule is an independent economist and commentator on issues of economic development and transformation, and just talking about, yet another Bretton Woods loan that South Africa has taken out. And of course, there will be more loans coming into the country, loans, grants, as Duma says. Some of the time, we don't even know the details that some of these finance projects are signed up on. So this is what government needs to make known to us.